Speaker, New Zealand First will not be supporting this bill and we oppose it.
I call the honourable member John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The last three speeches from the opposition have demonstrated a complete lack of understanding of what this bill is about. And I've got to say they haven't read it. And could I say to the New Zealand First Speaker who has just spoken that if he wants to make changes to this bill, the smart thing to do is to come and support it through to the Select Committee process and contribute to the collective wisdom of the House to get the legislation changed. The fact is that this legislation fits one of the four priorities of this term of government, and particularly building a more competitive and productive economy. And the centrepiece of the budget in 2010 was a major tax package reforming the tax system to make it fairer, more sustainable and better support for economic growth. That is what this bill does, Mr Speaker, and I support it totally.
This is a split call, as I understand it. I call the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, it gives me a lot of pleasure to follow the new questioner for the Maori Party, known as Hone Kuti Taru these days, Mr Speaker, but it's a pity that he couldn't have applied some of his experience in Kuti Taru lifting to thinking about this bill. Mr Speaker, what? Cut grass, hay, you know? Mr Speaker, there are a number of points that have to be made here. And the first, from my perspective, is that the government were very quick to hammer the paper boys in the budget, very, very quick to hammer the paper boys, but are taking their time. They're taking their time to close what is a much bigger rort. And I will say to my colleague Andrew Williams from the New Zealand First Party, I think he does have it wrong here. The ability of people to switch their tax systems, to pick and choose, to say one day they're dairy farmers and the next day they're fattening their beasts, and to switch back again the next year because their stock numbers are different or the valuations are different, is just wrong. It is a rort. It's been a rort for far too long. Frankly, Mr Speaker, it should have been closed off when we were in government. And if the Minister of Revenue was more active back in those days, it would have happened then. But, sir, we all know that he's a lazy minister. He doesn't work very hard, and, Mr Speaker, it should have been fixed at that stage. But I do say to New Zealand First, I think they're wrong on that. And I actually agree with John Hayes' advice on this. On tax matters where there are not enormous principles at stake, it would be better to get it off to the Select Committee, to hear the submissions, to get it tidied up, and then, if a party is still against it, to vote against it at a later stage, especially where there is clearly revenue to the Crown involved. Mr Speaker, the point that I would like to make is that there are a lot of areas that should be in here that are not. And what we are seeing is a massive reduction in the potential GST revenue as a result of the way the world is changing and with internet trading and, Mr Speaker, with the loss of GST that is occurring on transactions of under $400, Mr Speaker. And I'll use as an example the importation of bicycles. People are importing a frame valued at $395. Wheels, well, not me, I wouldn't know how to put them together, Mr Speaker. Wheels valued at $395 each. Braking systems valued at $300. Gearing systems valued at $300. Importing them as separate items, all under the threshold, but avoiding GST, and at the same time causing New Zealand wholesalers and retailers to go out of business. All over the country, Mr Speaker, there are retailers going out of business in a variety of areas because the way that commerce is done these days, people are avoiding the retailer not only for a matter of convenience, but a way of saving the GST that would otherwise be applicable if they went to their local shop. Mr. Speaker, it is a matter of fairness that we get this issue sorted out. Australia are getting it sorted out. Australia are getting a number of areas sorted out. They are, for example, working on the Google problem, Mr. Speaker, the Facebook problem. The massive companies which come to New Zealand use all of our services but don't pay their tax. And, Mr. Speaker, companies that are paying under 0.1% of their New Zealand profits in tax are wrong. And, Mr. Speaker, companies which do not recognise the revenue in New Zealand. People who take a Facebook ad out in New Zealand take it out with an Irish company, Mr. Speaker, in order to avoid Facebook do it completely, they do it deliberately, they do it for the vast majority of the New Zealand revenue, and they do it in order to avoid paying tax in New Zealand. And, Mr. Speaker, that is wrong. They can't use our resources without paying their tax, and I tell a lazy Minister of Revenue not to take as long fixing that one up as he did fixing up the fat cow tax.
I call the honourable member Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a short call to reaffirm the Green Party's support for this bill, but to remind the House that our support is contingent only, and it is through support through to the second.